boys, I'm back. I'll tell you what. KSI versus J-Brown. I mean, this is taking some really interesting turns. Now, I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist. I'm really not. And I have seen the fights where somebody will slow it down and come from a different angle, and you can see that punch missed. And then the guy went down. Bruce Seldon versus Mike Tyson would be the most blatant example, at least in main event title fight history of my lifetime. But Mike wasn't part of it. Don King didn't rig that. Bruce Seldon was scared to death. He pretended a punch landed that didn't, and he went down. That's just fear. That happens all the time. He might have been one of the worst performers. Tito, I don't say this because of my grudge with Tito, but Tito's performance of pretending he was knocked out by the punch Anderson Silva threw was bad, but it wasn't as bad as Bruce. Now, why would I go down that road? Why am I possibly telling you about that? Well, KSI is coming out, and it's a little bit of a weird stance. He called his win tarnished. And I would wonder why. I really would. Maybe he's just such a sportsman. Maybe that KSI, despite all the marketing, is just a really good-hearted fellow. That's possible. I'm dirty rotten. I would not be accused of those things. I will win at any cost. Any. But if I'm going to stand up fight, and I win by standing up, now all I gotta do, I'm pretty limited, right? It's boxing. I'm pretty limited. I gotta throw a left hand and a right hand, nothing else. And if I'm standing up and I throw one of those hands, and my ultimate goal is achieved, which is damage that stopped my opponent from continuing, you're gonna see me on Clayton Hyer's shoulders, pumping both fists in the air, looking for whoever's next. Not talking about it was tarnished. If I'm on the other side of it, and you unintentionally threw something at me, and it landed, and it rendered me unconscious, you win. The rules might say something different, but you win. And every fighter will back up what I just said. Some go for you and some go against you. And it doesn't really matter if the guy bent the rules. If it landed, particularly early in the first round, I mean, that's really not relevant. The guys are at their absolute best. They're at their absolute freshest, right? If you can't get out of the way of it, you go down and you can't continue. The other guy wins. That's how you would feel. And you want to call it tarnished. Now, I got to look at that because it was very suspicious. And the only part about this that's suspicious, it's not an illegal shot landing. That happens in almost every fight that you see. A lot of times it's a headbutt from the clinch, but things are happening that aren't supposed to happen, that are against the rules. But if they're unintentional and inadvertent, you just keep going. It could happen 10, 15 times in a match and never even be called based on what would happen. See Mike Tyson versus Holyfield, part 1. Holyfield hurt him with the hands, but he frustrated him by headbutting him constantly. Constantly, Holyfield was headbutting him. It affected the fight. It closed or swelled up one of Tyson's. I mean, this fight was a long time ago off the top of my head. I'm just sharing with you. It was never called for it, and even after the fact, nobody's ever said anything about it. You've probably never seen anybody meaningful speak about it till I did right now. It was just the way that it goes. Okay. The problem, and there's only one problem, which is the guy fighting KSI pretended to be asleep. He pretended to be knocked out. A shot like that, the one that he landed, man, that could hurt. That could break teeth. It's one of the reasons it's illegal. It could break jaws. I mean, it's one of the reasons that they don't do it. They wrap your hands up instead. It can be very dangerous, but it is not designed, and the place that it landed is not in line with a person that would be unconscious. All right, I mean, we'll turn this over to Dr. Abbasi. We'll see what he has to say about what I'm claiming in terms of that blow and where it landed. But when Dr. Abbasi speaks, and I'm happy to I'll stand down to him. I'll be wrong. But I'm pretty confident he's going to say, Chael, you make a fair point. That part of the body is not in line historically with places guys have been hit and become unconscious. Now, because that part was fake, straight up, because that part was fake, and now KSI is coming out and defending it. Look, that's not proof by me. That is not proof. That's evidence and it's circumstantial. That's not going to hold up. But I'm going to run it past you anyway. Because that was fake. You'd think KSI would call him out on that. Hey, man, I threw that elbow, but it wasn't that bad. And we've had guys do that. Aljo couldn't get a good night's sleep. He becomes world champion because Jon got disqualified. Jon should have been disqualified. He cheated. And they would not let it go. They didn't care that he cheated. They didn't care that he violated the rules. He shouldn't have taken it that way. And KSI could have done that. Hey, man, you played this up. That's what Aljo got accused of. You played this up. You were getting tired. That guy didn't want to be in there. He pretends that he's out. I mean, that's a very real thing because now when you have KSI defending him, not defending himself or the action of the referee, defending the guy, calling it tarnished. KSI now doing a little bit of pro wrestling. Came out, did WrestleMania with his partner. Quite frankly, they had an amazing spot. Such a good job, such a good performer. Do you guys know how pro wrestling stopped being a competition and started being a cooperation? I don't call wrestling fake. You hear people say, no, it's not fake. You could call it scripted. That wouldn't be blasphemy, but I don't call it scripted. But it's a cooperation. It's a performance. You're helping not only yourself with the audience, you're helping your opponent with the audience. The same goal, which is to convince and entertain the audience. Okay. Do you know how they started doing that? Because it didn't used to be that way. It's not as though they always came out in the world of sports entertainment. Those guys, man, my father's hero, Luthez, those guys were really going from town to town, trying to pin the other one or trying to make him tap out. That was real. But the circuit was small. There's 10, 11, 12 guys. The whole organization, they're piling in 2-3 cars, following each other up and down the interstate. They're tired, hoping for gas money. Nobody's watching. Television wasn't a thing. I mean, it's a very different thing. And they're hurt. And they're sore. And I could relate to that. Because I used to go town to town, trying to put that other man down or make him tap out. And the next morning, I didn't feel like doing it again, not right away. But these guys were performing 250 times a night. So one time they jump in the car and the guy just says you got a passenger, tells the driver, hey, listen, what we did last night, right? He's like, he's bloody, he's frightened, they're not even mad at each other, but it's just what they do. It's just what they do. He says, how about we do that tonight? But instead of really hurting each other, why don't we just make it look like we're hurting each other? But you gotta understand this, because see, the whole locker room didn't do it. The day that this became a thing, the day that wrestling went from a competition to a cooperation, it was not the whole locker room. It was not the whole industry. It was not the whole card. It was much more in line with what Pride Fighting Championship did, which is you have a lot of them that are exactly what you think. You have 1 or 2 that are paid for in the back. So it's really hard to know what's the shoot, what's the work, or even when is the shoot or work coming. And it's a relevant thing to know that eventually the 2 wrestlers that made this deal in the car, and they tell someone else, and they tell someone else, and pretty soon, right, I mean, as soon as anybody hears the idea, they love it instantly. And go with it. I would just bring this to your attention. I don't know how much you can put into the mannerisms of KSI and him coming out and tarnishing his own victory. I don't know about that. Maybe he's just a really sweet guy. Or maybe he's smart enough to know he's going to get roasted for a couple of days on Twitter if he was to do that, and he's a sensitive guy. But you have a problem, which is the J-Brone that ate the elbow pretended to be knocked out. What do you do with that? And if you're his opponent and you don't call that out, you instead take the sweet and nice approach, it's going to appear, at least to some, that you were in on it.